live. We'll count up a second or two. Is it safe to put Patrick Queen back in our lineups? That and more this week on the IDP Blitz. John Norton, is it safe to put Patrick Queen back in our IDP lineups?
Well, a lot of us don't have a whole lot of choice this week. We got some pretty serious heavy hitters on buys. Got a lot of injuries that have fallen out this week. I know I, for one, am missing Darius Leonard, so Queen's going to have to be in my lineup. But it's a good week for that. There are a couple good reasons that I like him this week. Number one, and probably the most important, he had a 92% snap share last week, which is the most that he's played since week 4. He has an excellent matchup with Cleveland. When they faced the Browns 2 weeks ago, he had 8 solo tackles, a fumble recovery, 2 tackles for a loss for his highest fantasy point total of the season so far. Josh Bynes is starting to see less and less opportunity, so there's not as much time sharing going on there. So all things told, I'm pretty confident in starting Patrick Queen this week.
What do we think about the Buffalo Bills linebackers after they got to face, I don't even know how many rush attempts, only 3 pass attempts, maybe a little bit of a different outlook this week against Tampa Bay? What's the outlook for IDP fantasy football?
Yeah, I think there was like 46 rush attempts and 3 passes. It was a little bit on the lopsided. Actually, they're both strong starters this week. Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds against Tampa Bay. Linebacker position has been averaging a little over 14 tackles per game, 6 and almost 7 assists per game against Tampa Bay. Not going to get a lot of big plays. They're not going to get interceptions and so forth. They do a really good job of taking care of the ball, even blitzing. It's very difficult to get to Tom Brady, but we should see some pretty solid, dependable tackle totals this week from them. So high floor, maybe a lower ceiling without the big play potential there, but definitely some guys we can count on.
You were used to the idea that maybe a running back with fresh legs, a player that's been hurt but is getting back in the lineup, can actually be an advantage in fantasy football because they're playing tired defenses. What about a pass rusher, Demarcus Lawrence, that's coming back and facing the football team in an NFC showdown this week?
The matchup is not necessarily spectacular. It's kind of a middle-of-the-road matchup, but there's a lot to be said for a pass rusher, really any defensive player with fresh legs, but particularly a pass rusher. Demarcus Lawrence came back last week, got his feet wet, so we already got to see that he got that warm-up game that a lot of players get when they first come back from a major injury like that. This second week, he played about half of the snaps last week. So he should be back in his normal role this week, 75-80% of the snaps. This is a guy that's good. You start him every week versus anybody in a normal situation, so it's not like you're taking a chance and rolling with a gamble here. The extra kick from the fresh legs, though, I think is going to be enough to push him up there a little bit. And every year it seems like we have guys come back like this, and I always try to mention it, as these guys tend to do very well when they come back. And there's also a possibility that we could get Randy Gregory back this week, so that would be a double whammy for if you're a Washington fan. But Gregory would be another one, take a little pressure off of Lawrence. Another good reason to think that Lawrence might have a pretty good game for us.
While we're on the subject of the Dallas defense, John, Keanu Neal's been putting up some pretty good numbers over the last 3 weeks. He was even solid last week, but should we expect that trend to continue against Washington?
Here's the thing that scares me about Neal, and there's a lot of people out there that they just look at the overall numbers from the box scores. You know, he had 4 tackles, 2 assists, and a sack last week. It wasn't great tackle totals, but he put up good numbers. He played virtually every snap the 2 previous games, so obviously he's solid. He's playing a lot and all that stuff. That's not necessarily the case. If you look a little bit closer this week, 4 tackles, 2 assists, and a sack is good in fantasy totals, but he only played 23 snaps last week, which was kind of a shocker after the way he had been used the 2 previous weeks. So if you're going to play him this week, and you may be in a situation where you have to do that, there is definitely some risk involved. He's not going to put up those kind of numbers on 23 or 25 snaps on any kind of a consistent basis. Again, after the way Dallas has run this year, week to week is a different game, almost a different team. You never know what they're going to wind up doing. So he could be back into that 80+% snap share this week, but he could also be in that 25% snap share like he was last week. So there's definitely some risk there, but the numbers have been good. You could do a lot worse if you have to take some risk and gamble on somebody.
This time, like you said, 4 teams on bye, or last bye week, maybe you're looking to the waiver wire. I know one thing that was nice to turn the page in Detroit, John, was with Matt Patricia gone, we did have some stable value with Tracy Walker. What about the other safety position? Could Dean Marlowe be emerging for us just in time to fill in?
So here's what I like about Dean Marlowe. We've seen a lot of NFL teams go to this big nickel type where they bring a strong safety up in the box, having played at the linebacker level as a nickel type linebacker. Dean Marlowe has kind of worked into that role for the last couple of weeks. He's a good size safety. He's the third safety on the field most of the time. When he's on the field, he is lining up at that second level quite often. He's put up good numbers 2 weeks in a row, 6 tackles and 4 assists in week 12, 7 solo tackles last week. He's got a good matchup this week with Denver. If he continues in the same role, which they won a game last week, so I would think that would probably be something they continue doing. So, if it works, don't fix it, right? So I kind of like Dean Marlowe as a sneaky play this week. I don't think he's got huge upside, but I think he's a guy that we can count on for 7 or 8 tackles and some pretty solid numbers.
Let's talk another sneaky play, potential bye week fill-in for those leagues where you have to start cornerbacks for the Giants. And there's an if here with injuries, but there is a rookie corner that might be able to help us down the stretch here with New York.
Yeah, we always talk about the rookie corner rule all year, especially in the preseason. Aaron Robinson, 3rd-round pick for the Giants, made his first start last week, had a pretty solid week. Actually, I think he made he made his first start last week. Going to look in line to make his second start this week if Adoree Jackson is not able to go. So we're going to have to pay a little bit of attention to the injury report here. But the important thing to know here, the Chargers since week 7 have been arguably the best matchup for corners. The corner position as a whole has averaged 19 combined tackles against them over the last 6 games, 2.5 passes defended, and just short of 1 turnover per game. So great matchup, rookie corner rule. As long as he is in that starting lineup and replacing Jackson, he's going to be a stud for us this week. He's one of those guys that you put him in your lineup and everybody will be thinking, well, that's a gimme for them. And then he goes out there and blows up, and then they're not happy when they lose to you in a situation like that. Even if he doesn't wind up being a starter, either Jackson or Bradbury could also be some solid starts for us just based on the matchup.
Yeah, and we'll see Keenan Allen is potentially going to miss that one on the COVID list. So that could really lead to more targets for whichever wide receiver Jalen Guyton.
Whoever's covering Mike Williams.
Whoever's covering Mike Williams, that'd probably be James Bradbury. Let's talk about some other injuries.
I would think.
This one I know is close to your heart, John, and it's been really fun watching Logan Wilson play. It's been really fun having him in your IDP lineup. You're not going to be able to do that at least this week. Is there a Bengals linebacker that we should pick up to replace Wilson?
Yeah, this one kind of broke my heart last week, not to mention it cost me a couple of games because I had him in my starting lineup and he went down early. He's definitely going to be out this week. Dislocated shoulder. Sometimes these are relatively quick turnarounds. The thing that I don't like about a dislocated shoulder is it tends to make players a little bit standoffish when it comes to putting their head in there and making tackles like they normally would. They get a little bit of fear. You get a little bit of pain every time you hit on that shoulder. Instead of sticking your head in there, you might stand back and let your fellow teammate there make that tackle instead if you see that he's going to get there. So there could be some issue with that going down the pike. Meanwhile, at least for this week, if you were watching the game, checking out the box scores last week, Joe Bocci ended up coming onto the field. Had a pretty solid game as a replacement, 6 tackles and 2 assists. With Akeem Davis-Gaither also on the shelf. They lost a couple other linebackers last week. Marcus Bailey went down early in the game, so they're very thin at the position. But what you need to keep in mind here, yes, Bocci came on, played quite a bit, had some some decent numbers, but it was Jermaine Pratt that played 97% of the time last week. He is probably going to be their 3-down linebacker, even though they've done seemingly everything they could since he's been with the team to keep him out of that role. As thin as they are, I cannot see them playing a guy who's basically the third or fourth linebacker in passing situations ahead of the guy that's a starter for them. So I look for Pratt to have the better numbers and the more opportunity there. If he's not available for you and you're in a bind, I think Bocce's probably going to get enough opportunity to score some points for us.
Okay, truly, John, there's the all-name team, and then there's truly the all-time all-name team. And when we look at the Raiders linebackers this week, we might have some fun because of a lot of injuries there. We talked about a rookie corner already. What about a rookie linebacker in Vegas?
So here's the problem with Divine Deablo. He's actually playing linebacker. He's been a linebacker on the roster all year long, but there's a lot of league software management programs out there that are still counting him as a safety. So although he is likely to be the stand-in for Corey Littleton if Littleton's not able to go, you might wind up having to slide him in as a safety instead of at the linebacker position. If you're in a league where you have that little bit of leeway there where you can start 4 defensive backs or 4 linebackers, that might not be too big of a deal. Littleton's day-to-day with a shoulder stinger. He has not practiced yet this week. It's hard to say whether he's going to be able to come back and make a run at it. Denzel Perryman left late in the game with an ankle injury. Nick Kwiatkowski suited up last week and aggravated his ankle injury early in the game. So chances are we're going to be looking at Deablo and KJ Wright as the 2 starting linebackers for the Raiders this week against Kansas City. Deablo finished the game last week, 8 tackles and 3 assists on 57 plays, so there's some pretty solid numbers there. On the field, he passed the eyeball test. He was getting it done, very aggressive. Chiefs might be able to actually use that against him and do some things with formations and misdirection and stuff like that could get him in some trouble. But I was pretty impressed with what I saw. If he winds up in the lineup this week, which it looks like he will be, I think it could put up some pretty solid numbers for us.
What about one of KJ Wright's former teammates, Jamal Adams, going down? Is there a safety we should pick up to improve our lineups?
Yeah, Jamal Adams wound up going on IR, headed for surgery here in the next few days or at least a couple of weeks, done for the season. You might remember early last year he missed a few games, and a guy named Ryan Neal came in. Nobody had ever heard of him, undrafted guy. It seems like Seattle tends to find a lot of those kind of guys. So they stuck Neal in there. He played four games for them. Over those 4 games, he averaged almost 14 points per game. Had no lower than 12 points in any of the 4 games that he started. Put up some pretty solid numbers, and he's going to be the replacement. He's not Jamal Adams. They might use him a little bit differently, which after the way they've used Adams this year might not be a bad thing when it comes to fantasy production. They've had Adams playing back deep a whole lot more this year than what they did last year. So that Neal could wind up being that more up in the box type guy on a more consistent basis. But if you lost Jamal Adams, if you're in a bind for somebody at the safety position to get you by for the rest of the season, Ryan Neal could be your target.
We woke up to some somewhat surprising news. I guess not that surprising if you've been watching the situation with Zach Cunningham and the Texans devolving. $53 million 4-year, $23 million extension last year, and now he gone. And actually, he restructured his contract so that he's can be claimed. So knowing the waiver order also can inform us here. What's next for Zach Cunningham, and what should IDP fantasy players, especially dynasty players, be thinking here?
If I'm in a dynasty league and this guy can be had somehow, I'm going to try to stick him on my team. We've talked about him already previously this year a few different times. This guy is still a good player. He didn't fit in their system. A lot of the guys that are still on that team don't fit in their system. They've got a lot of guys there on 1-year contracts. They've got a lot of holdovers from a previous system that don't really fit. Basically, you've got a lot of bad attitudes in the locker room there, and that was what ultimately came down to Cunningham being released. He was showing up late for meetings and just a generally poor attitude, and the team finally got tired of it, and they're trying to establish some discipline there, so they let him go for disciplinary reasons. Nothing wrong with the player. I do not expect that he will be unemployed for long.
No.
I'm sure that we will hear that he is claimed here as soon as his 48 hours is up. There are several teams out there right now that could be in the market for linebackers. Tennessee is very beat up. The Giants could use some help. The Raiders we just talked about, they're thin. Jacksonville, I don't know that they would be interested, but they probably should be. Detroit as well. Denver is a little thin now, although they have Baron Browning stepping up. Cincinnati, if they think Logan Wilson is going to miss any amount of time, he might be an option to fill in there. A couple other teams that need players are the Rams and the Chargers that could use some help at linebacker, but I don't necessarily think that Cunningham would be a good fit in those systems either, so I would probably count them out. But you can get your hands on this guy, or if you already have him on your team, don't cut him just because he was released by Houston. He's going to be playing somewhere here maybe as early as this weekend.
One last note in the Week 14 IDP Blitz. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate subscribers getting all the great work from John Norton and the IDP team. Make sure that you're reading Eyes of the Guru every week. And we appreciate the support on the YouTube channel. Like, comment, subscribe, help us grow this channel so we can reach even more people and reach more people that love IDP fantasy football. You mentioned the Rams. This is a situation, it seems like we talk a lot about the Rams linebackers on this show, John, because we don't know what's happening. Could we have some precious clarity about the Rams linebackers finally?
Maybe for a week. I don't know how long the clarity is going to last, but it seems like they like Ernest Jones a lot. He's been stepping up well. He played 98% of the snaps last week. I'm pretty sure I saw him wearing the green dot helmet, which is a communications helmet, and calling plays in the huddle, at least, if not all the whole game, at least some of the game. We saw Troy Reeder only played 29 snaps in the game. We've seen Ernest Jones put up pretty good numbers when he's seen a decent amount of playing time. And we also know from several years past, last 3 or 4 years, whoever ends up in that position tends to put up good numbers for us. So it's been sort of a revolving door, especially this year. It seems like it's changed from week to week just about who was in that spot, or at least early in the season it was. But it looks to me, and I get the feeling that Jones is finally the guy that they're going to settle on here. So, again, if you're tight this week, this was another guy that has the potential to put up good numbers. Cross your fingers and hope that what we saw last week was the beginning of a trend and not just a flash in the pan.
You're going to put up good numbers if you're hanging out with us every Wednesday afternoon for the IDP Blitz. We appreciate your time and your precious attention. And always, we want to serve you because you're so classy.